Good day, everybody. This is Kevin Michelson with the Central Florida Tech Grove, and we want to thank you for joining us today in our Connect discussions and our continuing presentations on deeper dives in the ITSEC presentations. Today with us is Dr. Grace Ahn, Dr. Robinson, and Dr. Walker. And we're going to be talking about a topic that I find really intriguing. And in fact, it was so intriguing that it won first place in the simulation category at ITSEC. And as first-time submitters and first-time winners, they're one for one in the terms of how they've gone out, and successfully presented a paper that really got a lot of attention. And so this is a great topic. I think everybody's going to really enjoy today, and I think it has some real relevance. I've been in the military simulation and training environment for a number of years, and one of the things that we constantly stress are efficacy and efficiency around our training and development. And it's all about training soldiers, preparing sailors, preparing airmen for combat, and improving their ability to perform their tasks, but also effectively putting a number of those service members through training as efficiently as possible. But often, sometimes what gets overlooked is the emotional side. And what we have here with this paper is we're going to dive into that emotional side of well-being of our service members that are deployed for long periods of time. And this very intriguing piece of software and a study that this team from the University of Georgia conducted, and get into some of those aha moments. So to give you some of the relevance around this, we just had Admiral Gilday, the Chief of Naval Operations here at the Central Florida Tech Grove recently. And one of his comments was after he came back from visiting the Nimitz that just came back into port was he was so proud of the sailors and being able to continue the long deployment, maintain their focus, but he also recognized the fact that it was very stressful. They spent over 208 days, they spent over 341 days on deployment. It was a record-breaking deployment for the Nimitz. And that is just one ship out of many. This destroyer Stout spent 215 consecutive days at sea without dropping into port. And a lot of that was because they were already deployed and that COVID hit at the same time. But that creates an emotional distance and stress on both the sailor and their families. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means and some of the technology using XR and how we can overcome that. So again, thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to the presentation. And before we dive into it, I was going to ask the doctors if they could just tell us a little bit about the Gavel team, University of Georgia. What about your journey led you to this study and the development of this software? And then, go into a little bit more with the slides and tell us, more about what you found. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's a really exciting opportunity for us to be able to share our research. And I guess the very first beginnings of this topic came about because I am a working parent, and I had an engineering colleague who has children about the same age as mine. And as working parents who need to travel quite frequently, so not to the extent of long-term deployment, but we do travel quite a lot. And every time we go to business meetings or these business travels, we found that it was really difficult, particularly with younger children, to communicate what I'm doing and to learn what they've been doing. Particularly with younger boys, I feel like it doesn't matter what you ask. The answer is always determined. It's I don't know or I don't care. And, over time, we realized that there really is a better way to communicate within the family context, and particularly when you are in need of a lot of communication activities. When you are physically separated with them, we already have the platforms able to do so. It's just that a lot of the research focus has been, like Kevin mentioned, on the performance or the efficiency of the military service person, and not necessarily about the general well-being outside of the immediate work context. And so we wanted to approach how do we sort of comprehensively address this issue of resilience, military resilience, and family readiness. And so that kind of brought us together as an interdisciplinary team, because I am from communication, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later. And we were able to get engineering involved from a longtime colleague who I work with often on these projects. And both of us study virtual reality. I study it from the social science aspect, and my colleague studies virtual reality from the engineering aspect. But we realize that we do need expertise in other areas, for instance, family science, so family interactions, and sort of a more community level sociology modeling expert who is able to deal with the data that we're going to be able to collect with these virtual reality platforms. And so that sort of brought us together as an interdisciplinary team, and we'll sort of dive more into these details as we go through the slides. So today we wanted to share a little bit about our preliminary findings and give you a sort of a sneak peek into what this platform currently looks like. We have a prototype that's about, I would say, at a level 5 technology readiness level. And we were able to sort of roll it out in terms of a prototype testing with focus groups with military families who have been deployed for extensive periods of time. And so we'll share some of these details with you. So the core idea of this platform is to try to provide a better communication experience for families who are geographically dispersed. And that dispersion may come from a variety of different reasons. So it's not necessarily just military deployment, but work in and of itself through business travel may physically separate you from families, or there may be migrant families who need to be separated for extensive periods of time due to their work requirements, or it might be a deployment. And so we wanted to see whether we're able to use communication platforms to connect these families regardless of their physical location, geographically speaking. And the reason we wanted to look at this as a research question is because families really need that shared social reality in order for them to feel connected and have family cohesiveness. And that brings a family together. And the reason why this cohesion is important is because this serves as a buffer whenever you are facing challenges or adversity as a family. So whenever a family member is facing challenges or adversity, is going through difficult times, then that family cohesion, the connection that you have within the family, is able to sort of give you that level of social support so that you can face those risk factors and be able to overcome the adverse events with least amounts of negative consequences. And when you are physically separated from your family, building that family cohesion becomes really challenging. And this is because you have various communication barriers. So right now, most military service persons, when they are deployed, tend to rely on telephone or social media or email, but there is only a certain amount of shared experiences that you can have through email or through video conferencing like this, because we can't share the same space, right? I am not able to hand an object over to you, or we are not able to watch, let's say, the same screen together sitting side by side. And that shared space adds a completely different level of experiences that you're able to have together. And as a family, and particularly with younger children, these shared experiences really go a long way to build memories as a family. And so with a shared space provided by virtual reality, we're able to help families maintain things like family routines or their rituals. And it may be something as simple as, a family movie night, or they may be able to help children with their homework, or they may be able to play games with them. So whatever they did as a family together before deployment, they're still able to continue regardless of that physical separation. So that's the style of family communication that we wanted to promote using these virtual reality platforms. And so the idea was that when there is a potential to have conflict, and with physical separation, there's always a larger potential to have these conflicts because of that communication barrier. This sort of family conflict tends to lead to what we call as reduced mission readiness or family readiness. And so when the family starts falling apart, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just the family, because you can't really think of the service person, the military service person, independently apart from that family. And so it really tends to impact the performance, the job satisfaction, and then ultimately they think about leaving the military completely. And so it has a direct impact toward reducing military retention. And so our goal was to try to support the communication performance within the family so that they're able to keep that family cohesion together, and therefore increase mission readiness and family readiness, and then ultimately increase the retention in the military. So here's a quick look at what that virtual space looks like. So when we envisioned, well, what would the virtual space look like when families get together? We wanted to sort of keep that ambiance of that family home or the family living room as much as possible, so that the families can come together to enjoy the things that they once enjoyed when they were physically together. And the virtual reality platforms that we have worked with up until now have largely been focused on solitary experiences. So it was sort of a single user experience, going into virtual worlds, wearing that headset, having some sort of a cool experience, and then leaving the virtual world without ever meeting anyone. But these days, virtual reality is slowly and gradually moving towards a much more social experience so that you're able to interact with others. And this really brings that element of shared experience to life. And so using social VR, we're able to bring in multiple users in an embodied format. So they all have hands and legs and arms, and they have bodily features so that they're able to do simple acts like hugging each other or high-fiving, shaking hands, playing ball. And I'm sure that this whole COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that importance of touch, right? Of haptic experiences shared between two people. And so having that virtual experience, that virtual space allows you to do these variety of things. And so let me quickly show you a video of the various activities that we are able to provide to families in this virtual space. Yeah, so the activities that you see there are not designed to be maximally exciting, like the way that many virtual reality games are designed. They're actually designed to be much more age appropriate, so that you have a variety of things that you can do with younger children, which is sort of a content area that virtual reality hasn't really looked at the moment. And so a lot of the virtual reality platforms that you see at the moment are designed specifically for adult users. And I don't think I know of many examples where they're looking at it within the context of how families interact with each other, or how families communicate with younger children in particular. And so the goal of the whole study was to try to re-envision how family communication works. particularly focusing on shared realities and building memories with the parent who may not be there or the caregiver who is not there. With younger children, so that the physical distance really isn't a factor anymore in the way that people communicate and interact with their families while they're deployed for extended periods of time. And the strength of this platform that it's not only is it engaging, but it's generally robust and easily scalable in the sense that a lot of the virtual reality headsets that we have at the moment are wireless. They're completely all-in-one, meaning that you do not have to plug it into a separate computer. And all you need is a small space around you so that you're able to engage in these interactions. And they're almost completely plug and play. So if we were to, let's say, send out a headset, a virtual reality headset with deployed soldiers, all they would need to do is take it out of the case, power it on, and it should be ready to go. And a lot of the screencasting features that are featured with the virtual reality headsets allows anybody around that space to be able to see and for the researchers to be able to observe exactly what's going on in that space. And so it does allow us for collecting data, behavioral data in ways that were just not possible with the more traditional ways of conducting these experiments. And so I guess one unique thing about this team that came together is that we're transdisciplinary. And so we have a multiple collection of expertise around the university. And I think these big questions like how do you re-envision family communication for deployed military soldiers? That is a really complicated question. And it requires a big team with multiple people with different areas of expertise. And so I'm from the discipline of communication. Dr. Robinson is from sociology. Dr. Walker is from family science. And unfortunately, he couldn't make it to this talk, but Dr. Johnson is from engineering. And together we're able to sort of fill in the gaps where we need, I guess, different approaches and different orientations in an attempt to comprehensively answer this question. And so in terms of communication, the reason why communication is perhaps a little bit unintuitively related to virtual reality is because over 70% of our communication is actually nonverbal, and it requires a lot of spatial cues. But with video conferencing right now, for instance, it would be almost impossible for me to say over there and have people understand me. Or it would be virtually impossible for me to hand over, let's say, a pen or a piece of paper to my next door window over there. And because of that, it really limits the way that we're able to interact with other people within these environments. And we tend to sort of treat technology as this monolithic blob, right? So we tend to treat screen time as a monolithic blob, but that's not really true because it really depends on that context, right? What are you doing on the screen? And what are you doing with the technology and its differing features? And so the way that we use technology really depends on what our end goals are and what our current situation is. And so for every different situation, you need different technology platforms with different features. And so virtual reality's future is not really just about games. It's actually, the promise and the potential really lies in the non-gaming applications like the ones that you see here and within the social interactions that we're able to have within the virtual space. So let me hand it over to Dr. Robinson. Oh, wait, actually, is this? Yes. So let me hand it over to Don.
All right, hello. I was delighted when Grace approached me about joining this project just because it sounded so intriguing to me. I am an experimental social psychologist and social networks researcher, and I study emotion and social relationships. And so one of the things that we know from research in this area is that activities, especially physical activities that involve coordinated physical behaviors with a mutual focus of attention, tend to create shared emotions and enhance social bonds in ways that face-to-face communication just doesn't, right? So there's something special and quite different about joint activities. And so one of the things that intrigues me about this project is whether or not that kind of those benefits will translate from these kinds of virtual engagements where people can engage in these coordinated activities together, because that's something that's not really been explored yet in the literature. We also know that relationship quality predicts a whole host of positive outcomes, from mental health outcomes and physical outcomes, all kinds of behavioral outcomes for children. So for all members of families, the quality and interconnection of relationships matters immensely. And so downstream, in our next iteration of this research, we want to have a serious amount of attention paid to what's happening to these interpersonal relationships over the long haul and how that's influencing longer term outcomes. Also, we know from existing research that for military service personnel, parental attachment during deployment has a pretty strong impact on reintegration outcomes post-deployment. And so if we're successful in translating the kind of benefits of participation in these virtual family rooms into strengthened affective bonds, especially parent-child bonds, then we should expect that the outcomes for both the service personnel and for the families during post-deployment reintegration should be better. And so there's all kinds of indirect reason to expect that this is going to be a fruitful approach. We just haven't gotten to those larger outcomes yet, and that's the kind of an exciting part of that of this project for me. And just sort of on a personal note, I spent 12 years in a long distance marriage, and can really personally relate to what it's like to have to try to figure out how to stay affectively attached when conversations are limited to telephone, and I didn't even have the benefit of video chats. And I will also say that I'm chomping at the bit right now to be able to use the virtual family room to interact with my grandchildren, with whom I FaceTime every day during the pandemic, but I can't actually play with. And that's what they want and need. And that's what would really help us. And so I'm personally ready for this virtual family room to go live. And that was only strengthened by the results that we encountered in the focus groups, where we had families engaging in the family room and talking to us about it. It got me pretty excited. I'm going to turn over to our family scientist, though.
Well, thank you, Dawn. I feel like in some ways, being the last of the three of us, I get to repeat a couple things. I'll try not to do that too much, but yes, I am in the Department of Human Development and Family Science. And so when I was approached, and most of my work focuses on risk and resilience in military families, I'm very interested in how do we make outreach efforts for military families evidence-based and actually useful information. And so when I was approached with this opportunity, I was like, yes, this is exactly the type of work I want to do, where we can, learn about military families and we can improve military family life. And so I think I just wanted to highlight a couple of family science concepts that I think are really relevant here. And Grace kind of hit on one earlier, which is we really think about family readiness as mission readiness. And to date, there's a lot of, clearly that's something most of us in the military family world have heard, but really the mission readiness is like the goal, right? Like we kind of just skip over the, oh yeah, we got to do something for the family, but we're going to get to mission readiness. Like that's really where the efforts have continued to target. And so, yes, we agree mission readiness is essential. It's, it's lethality. It is, important for life and protecting life. But, family readiness is a huge part of that. And so we talk about, systems, and the family is a system. And we talk about how systems, the parts of the system have to work together. And there is both spillover and crossover between family members. So we think about spillover. A service member has a conflictual interaction with their spouse, and then they have to go out and they have to, walk the perimeter. And that impacts their ability to focus on what they need to focus their attention on at that moment. So that's kind of a spillover from one environment to the next. But there's also this crossover where, the service member's having a tough time during the deployment cycle, and that crosses over to affect all of the other family members. And so I hope, emphasizing that is a bi-directional relationship, that what's going on in the field has impacts for the family unit. What's going on in the family unit has impacts for what's going on in the field. And, I think part of this emphasis that we're going after that Grace also mentioned is, mission readiness. It also includes retention. And I think that's an important point because I like the phrase of you recruit the member, but you retain the family. And, from my interactions with military families and with commanders, it's essential that military families feel that there are resources for them and they are supported. And opportunities like this that are exciting and really build cohesion and connection among family members during difficult times in novel ways could go a long way in those goals of supporting families. So again, just kind of the emphasis for us is on that family unit. I think that's what I'd like to close with. The idea that if we can facilitate close, positive, meaningful family interactions during times of high stress, like deployment, that can go a long way to improve a variety of outcomes, from mental health to family health to readiness and retention in various ways. So, I think that's where the family science lens comes into this, thinking of our interdisciplinary team.
Okay, so I think the session was designed more to be a conversation. So I think now we're going to hand it over to Kevin to lead that Q&A session.
Excellent job. This was really fantastic. I know we've all had conversations prior to this, and while I transitioned to some of the questions that the audience has started already to pull over, I think one of the things that really intrigued me were some of the aha moments. And the one that really stuck with me was the spousal satisfaction had a greater amount of impact on retention and the service members' approval rating of their job. So I wonder if you could expand a little bit on that while I get some of the other questions ready, and then we'll start peppering you pretty quickly here.
Yeah, so I'm going to begin, but I think both Katie and Don are more than welcome to jump in. So this isn't just about the military family when it comes to work-life balance. It's actually a pretty big segment of work-life scholarship because it turns out that it's not just the worker's job satisfaction that predicts retention. A big part of it is spousal satisfaction and overall the family satisfaction in terms of how the worker is able to kind of go between the job and the family. And recent studies demonstrate that when you are having lots of conflict with your spouse, so if your spouse's satisfaction is low regarding your job, so not the spouse's job, then the likelihood of you leaving the job permanently is significantly higher. And of course, this makes a lot of sense, right? So typically, if that conflict continues in that family, it's very hard for the worker to continue to focus on the job as if nothing were happening. And so, we tend to sort of focus a lot on the efficiency and the effectiveness, performance of the worker himself or herself, but it turns out that the worker doesn't live life alone. He or she is a part of a larger family, a larger community. And so that well-being of those units matter just as much in terms of determining the overall performance of this single person.
Dr. Robinson, Dr. Walker, do you want to expand on that a little bit more? Or?
I don't have much to add to that, other than I have seen that general literature on work-life balance and commitment to staying with a particular organization in general. I'm not sure I actually read the article about the context of the military service personnel. I'm not sure if that came from Katie or not, but I have seen that finding, as Grace alluded to, more generally, and I think that's pretty strong. I think that some of the research I've been reading recently is been focusing on parent-child relationships during deployment and how that affects post-deployment outcomes, which are pretty striking. And in the service personnel that we talked to and their spouses, one of the things that we kept hearing about is the feeling that during deployment, one parent became the parent, right? So they experienced life in some ways as if they were a single parent. And one of the things that didn't come through probably yet in our video about this virtual family room, but there are ways of parenting at a distance that are built into this family room. There are ways for the parent to help kids with homework, for example. There are whiteboards. There are ways of bringing in material, video or other kinds of material through images, so that they can actually work together on tasks. The other thing, I feel like this is getting a little bit away from your question, Kevin, but I feel like didn't get communicated well by our video, is that the video kind of, because it's demonstrating some of the activities that are available, still looks a little bit like a video game, right? It looks like an individual engaging in activities. But when you're in the virtual family room, it actually feels like you are co-present with a person and that you're engaged in activities together. It's a really different kind of feel. I have no virtual reality experience prior to this project. And when we began this project, Grace had us conducting our team meetings in the virtual family room, so through virtual reality. And I was blown away at how much it felt like we were in the same room, even though we could be, hundreds of miles apart. But we would feel like we were sitting down together having a talk, or running into each other, depending on what we were.
Yeah, I mean, that level of presence is so high that when another avatar is sitting too close to you, you just want to say, can you back off a little? Because you can almost feel that body heat radiate.
So in industry, we call that eating your own dog food. So, using your own tools. So it's good to hear that you're not just developing, but you're actually using it for your own deployment and your own use. And one of the other questions that kind of stuck with me, and I think we've heard it a couple of times in your presentation, is younger children versus middle-aged children versus older children. And there's kind of a different dynamic that takes place between the three, and how the parent that's on the other end deals with their children, but then also how they react. So I was wondering, maybe you could just dive into a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so with the younger children, I think these experiences of, shared activities with the parents go a really long way. But like you said, there are different age-appropriate content that needs to go into these virtual family rooms, depending on the age of that child. And we had conducted a structured interview session with about 14 military service persons who had experiences of extended deployment time. And what they said is actually quite striking. I didn't expect for this to be the most needed and wanted activity within the virtual family room, but they pointed out that the spouses had always wanted them to do and work on homework with their kids. And I'm like, we have all of these other fun things that you could do, but it turns out that on a day-to-day level, what the spouses actually need for the service persons to be involved with is the kids' schoolwork, or, help them out with projects, take them off their backs for like an hour a day. And
Yeah, here you go. You're home. Here you go.
exactly. And now it's possible. Like if a teenager or a middle schooler has a science project that needs to be worked on with a parent, then now you're able to work with that, that science project, pull in planets, write things and draw things on the whiteboard, put things together. You're basically using the same space in 3D models to successfully collaborate on this project with your child. And therefore, the spouse gets maybe an hour off every day. And so surprisingly, this was the number one expressed needs among the service persons that we had interviewed for that session.
That's really cool.
I was also just going to add, if I can, Kevin, that I think what's so great about the age groups and the different groups is that so many of the things in the family room are adaptable and not specific to an age range. So there was mention of, there's a way to like play video in the family room. So for a family that we had that had a younger child, that was playing Baby Shark and dancing to Baby Shark. For a 12-year-old, that's a very different type of video possibly that they want to watch. And so, like those sorts of things give a lot of flexibility.
That's very cool. So, so one of the questions that I've seen kind of popping up and recurring is some of these maybe additional features that you might be looking at. You mentioned haptics, for example, the controllers, but I'd be curious to know if you're interested in doing more with like haptic gloves, or one of the questions was, how do you monitor eye tracking and maybe engage that, because so much of our interpersonal discussions is monitoring and seeing the facial expressions. And so maybe you guys can, I know it's still early in what you're doing, but are these things that you're thinking about incorporating into the future? And are you going to do it, or is this something that third parties can help with and build as part of a larger ecosystem?
So I think it'll be a mixture of both. I think in the future, we're really interested in not only looking at virtual reality technology, but also integrating other forms of technology devices like augmented reality or just simple video casting. And essentially, we're, I think, moving slowly to a future where right now the hardware is what divides what's VR and what's AR. But VR is now working on pass-through technologies, and AR is now working on trying to integrate and the physical reality with the virtual overlay that you have in that space. And so it's a possibility for us to be able to integrate all of these asymmetrical platforms so that they're all meeting in the same virtual space, but they're essentially using the device on hand. And I think that universal access allows people to enter at their own convenience. And we're able to work in other devices as needed. But I think the most important thing is not just about, are we adding haptics and are we adding, more cooler features and bells and whistles, but I think it's how do we allow people to access in context and situations where they maybe not be able to, put a goggle over their heads. And so I think that's kind of the urgent need that we're addressing at the moment.
Excellent. And are you partnering with anybody on that in the hardware space, or what are you looking at in terms of developing that aspect?
We're currently just using the commercially available platforms like headsets that offer eye tracking. And we're trying to work with, try to, I guess, find out more fundamental human motivations on why they're using these platforms. We're not necessarily developing the devices per se. So we would be, more than welcoming, and we would love to have a partner who is interested in working with us in terms of that. So I think we're more interested in the more fundamental human needs and human communication processes. But if we have a partner who is able to bring in the tech for us, then that would be a great synergy together.
Okay, so to expand on that, we just had a question pop up on the question and answer is, can you speak to the importance of photorealistic representation of the family members? With recent developments like with Unreal and Unity as a gaming engines, you're getting these very realistic avatars now. And my experience has been, there's always been this divide. If it's super realistic but not effective, it turns people off because there's a distance, like you don't seem real. So the cartoonish side appeals because there's not that repulsion of, oh, well, I know this is a virtual space. I know it's a virtual avatar. So did you touch on any of that in your research in terms of, comparing and contrasting how detailed the environment and the avatars would be?
Yeah, so there is quite a bit of literature that deals with this particular problem. And one comes from the engineering side of things, and they talk about that uncanny valley. I don't know if you are familiar with this, but essentially, until we get to the point where the representations are so realistic that they're almost like a real human, there's a dip in that valley where it's not quite there, but enough to be creepy. And so when you hit that uncanny valley, that's where I think a lot of people get creeped out, because we're not quite there, but it's enough, just enough to be starting to be a little bit creepy, right?
Right.
And a lot of the communication literature also addresses this in the sense that it's not necessarily the photorealism that we respond to, it's the behavioral realism. So even if it's a stick figure, even if it's a cartoon, if it starts behaving pretty much like a human being, then we start adhering human aspects and social aspects to it. And so even, when we watch stick figure cartoons, our brains are much more than ready to fill in the gaps with imagination so that you don't necessarily need photorealism to make sense of it. And I think in the virtual space that applies just as well. And so even if we're just a blob or, a stick figure or cartoonish figure, as long as the behavioral tracking is available, then people still respond to it as if they're dealing with human beings.
Great.
I was going to give an example. I was going to give our example again from,
okay.
I've never used virtual reality before joining this team and figuring it out. But when we're in the rooms together, there is not a visual representation, but you see everyone else's hands and you see where their head is because of their goggle set. And so you can see height differences. And Kyle, our engineer, is quite tall. John is not quite as tall. And you can tell, one of our graduate students, she moves her hands a lot, and we could see that. You could, even without knowing who was who, you can see those behaviors that Grace is talking about. And it really does give you a sense of more of the connection, more of those nonverbals.
Okay. Excellent. So one of the things that you didn't go into a lot of detail on in the presentation, but it's more the behavioral aspects that you're actually able to record and track. So some of the data points that you're able to monitor. So I'm hoping maybe you could expand a little bit on that. And then also, I know there's an observation mode. Tell us a little bit how military observers or even commercial or psychological or sociologists can then get a peek into the world of your beta testers, if you will, and how that might be used in a more commercial or in a military psychological way or sociological way.
Yeah, so the strength of using virtual reality platforms isn't just about delivering cool simulations, which they're really cool. But as a researcher, I think the greatest strength lies in the almost complete experimental control that you have. And so you're able to build worlds where you determine exactly what happens at exactly at what point of time, and you're able to repeat that infinitely. And you're able to collect data at a much more fine-grained level that you're able to do in more traditional lab settings. For instance, I'm able to detect and log every movement that you are making in this world at every millimeter, millisecond, every word that is uttered. So both verbal and nonverbal tracking is available. And we're able to screencast it so that different researchers are able to observe what is happening in that room and record and make notes of the interactions that are happening in real time. And so it does give you a lot of other tools that you wouldn't have in this traditional sense. And as you are going through these experiences, you're able to change out what that experience is at a click of a button. So as an experimenter or a researcher, for data collection purposes, this gives you lots of powerful tools that you would never have otherwise, including eye tracking within that world. And so now we're able to track exactly where people are looking, for how long, what choices they're making, what objects they're holding, so on and so forth.
And then how could you use that? How would a researcher use that in advancing and helping with family resilience?
Yeah, so for instance, a good example might be I'm able to measure exactly how far you're standing from other people. And so there's that science of proxemics, right? If you like me, you stand a little bit closer. If you don't like me, you tend to maintain a certain personal distance. And so that can be a proxy measure of cohesion rather than me saying, do you really like that person? And self-reports really are limited to the effect that there's a desirability effect, right? So either you give me what you think I want to hear, or you're just lying. But with behavioral data, we're able to complement the self-report survey data by verifying that what you said is exactly how you behaved. And so we're able to get, I guess, a more comprehensive look at the behavior and the reported measures that we are interested in.
And one more of a legal question, opting in, and how do you gain that opt-in acceptance, and what percentage of the people that you studied did opt in so you could actually do some of that measurement?
We actually have, I think most of our studies are only opt-in. So we have full active informed consent, and Dawn is our chair of the institutional review board, and so she might have more information on this. But we allow you to determine ahead of time and let you know and fully consent or fully inform you that this is the data that is being collected. This is what we're going to do with it. If you don't like it, then you are fully able to opt out. We're able to take the data and delete it afterwards if you want us to delete the data after completion, and you suddenly decide that you don't want to participate anymore. And so we still have that level of control even after that data is logged onto our servers.
Great. Here's an interesting question that kind of popped up from the audience too, that's kind of related to this. Is it says resilience may depend on personal characteristics. Can you predict who benefits most from this kind of intervention or this tool?
Yes, and I think that's a really critical point, because it would be difficult for us to say this is a blanket tool for any family in any situation. So no social science is that simple. And so particularly for families with a history of clinical problems, and Katie can talk more about this, and there's actually a related question. So not all communication is good. So we cannot say that increased communication is universally good for every family. That's just not true. It depends on the quality of communication and the situation of each individual family. If you currently have a clinically diagnosed problem that is ongoing in the family, then that communication might have to be moderated or guided by a trained clinician. But generally speaking, without these, underlying factors, generally communication tends to be good, but that shouldn't be interpreted as communication is always good and all the time. So the quality of communication is really important here.
And I think that's our goal, is that, part of what we're trying to figure out is a lot of that families can just jump in the room and figure out as they go. Again, families with relatively, healthy relationships. What sorts of minimal guidance can we give them that will foster better communication? And then, I am a marriage and family therapist by training. And so I do think there are, future ways that we can utilize this as a clinical intervention type for families who are at risk or experiencing challenges, where we could think of this as a tool that a clinician could use to guide families on new ways of interacting. There's actually some research that shows it's sometimes it's great to try out new things in a new environment, that isn't like in person. It is a way for them to do something new in a different space. And so that we think there are opportunities to figure that out. But that's certainly kind of our hopes for future research, to figure out those nuances of who is this a good tool for, how can it be better.
Yeah, but typically the more contextual cues you're able to provide to people, the less likelihood of having a conflict. Because I think a big problem with, let's say, text conversations, emails, or phone conversations is that lack of contextual cue, right? It's really easy to misinterpret when you lack that nonverbal cue, what exactly the other person wants to say. But when you have the behavioral data and the situational data to interpret the other person's communication intentions, then the likelihood of conflict tends to go down. But in future renditions, and we are currently working with a clinician in the military context, this would be a wonderful tool for them to use for things like observation or clinical treatment.
So to build on that, there was a question from James and talking about conflict resolution. I think that touches a little bit about not all communication is good communication. And then I saw another chat about, spousals, having spats on the in the room. Does that help or does it hurt? That sort of thing. So I think if you can maybe touch on that a little bit, it might be an interesting segue into a couple more questions I have for you.
So I'm sure Katie is a much more of an expert on this, but I have a feeling that talking it out is probably better than not talking at all. But maybe Katie has a more expert opinion.
I'm blanking on the term, but there's a lot of really good research on this. And actually, one of a graduate student I work with, Ben, is on the line, and he's read a good bit of this research. So Ben, you can correct me later. But there's a lot of research about service members often worry about what do I tell, and they try to protect their spouse by not saying things. And that research is somewhat mixed. Like, yes, there can be, again, the idea of spillover and crossover by sharing stress. But ultimately, most of that research has concluded that it's better to have the conversations than not. Again, everything is with a caveat, though. Of course, there are good ways to have those conversations, and there are not so great ways to have those conversations. But, I think that is certainly something to think about is, processing, again, from a clinical angle. How do we prepare families to use this technology in the helpful ways?
Yeah, but one way to apply this might be, so we've done this with another STEM education-oriented virtual space, but when you need reminders or guidance or best practices, it's really easy to pull up a screen in that virtual space for reminders, right? Here are the 3 things that you should keep in mind even as you are conversing, or here's sort of a communal goal that we want to work towards. So if the couple is indeed motivated, and of course this would completely depend on the individual motivation, but if they're motivated to work this out through a conversation without dealing with escalating conflict, it is a really good tool to be able to provide guidance in that way.
And it's also the shift to, again, the room is really about doing things together, and it's the communication that arises in that shared interaction versus the, so what you do today, those sorts of conversations where the stress specific to deployment could be more of an issue.
So I'm gonna, we've only got time for a few more questions, and just an observation on my point. I think military families and I think distance learning or distance families like on oil rigs and that sort of thing. But I think maybe an area that you guys could focus in on might be behavioral centers or even prisons. And what I'm meaning by that is there's often that lacking of personal communication with their family that might help them reorient and re-enter society over a longer period of time, and maybe de-stress some of the conflict that we have in those environments already. And if we can bring that down with family communication, maybe there's an area there. And plus, I think you've got plenty of test subjects. So
yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for work in that area. We've talked about that somewhat extensively already. There is, interestingly, a lot of good research that combines the investigation of post-deployment outcomes for service personnel with reentry outcomes for people who are exiting incarceration experiences, showing that a lot of the same dynamics occur, a lot of the same predictors of success are there. And so we think that that's a really good parallel to this. And it would have additional advantages besides kind of the individual benefits that we've been talking about already and family benefits. There should be institutional benefits for the total institution, as well as perhaps some enhanced safety for children not having to physically go to a prison to visit a parent, for example, but be able to do that visitation from the familiar home environment through technology. So we think that's a really promising area.
Excellent.
Could I quickly cycle back to an earlier question, Kevin?
Sure.
When your question about data that we're collecting and data that we could collect, other kinds of integration, I wish Kyle were here, because he would have a lot to say about a lot of these questions. But in my lab, I use infrared thermography to measure changes in blood flow on the face as to index to index affective responses during interaction. And one of the things that Kyle has talked about is trying to integrate that kind of sensor technology into a headset for this kind of work. And I think that also could be sort of an additional kind of psychophysiological information that would be directly useful for this kind of application.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So to that point, I think there are a number of advancements on the chemical studies that are taking place with particular hardware vendors. I know HP is actively looking at that. I think Vario is also looking at that, and Lenovo. I think those three are really looking at reading body and physical temperature differences and that sort of thing, and starting to integrate that into their headsets. So that might be something for you to look into, some of those vendors. Not that we're advocating them, but just to let you know that there are some of those technologies that exist. Real quickly before we have our final question is, some of the audience members were interested in what you use to develop the application. What gaming platform, how long did it take, that sort of thing. So if you could just quickly touch on that, and then we'll bring it to close with one final question.
So typically, when virtual reality is talked as a gaming platform, I think it's because the idea of using virtual reality is always reminiscent of a game. I think that digital environment is always game-like. But when we talk about gaming and non-gaming contexts, we typically use the word gamification, right? So we take the gaming elements and try to use it in a non-gaming context so that we're able to motivate certain behaviors. But a lot of this really is a hit or a miss, because when we deal with human motivations, human beings are complicated animals. We cannot get them to do what they need to do at the time that they should do it. And so when we try to reward them with game-like platforms, then I think typically it tends to be very short-lived, and we don't see long-term behaviors expand over time. And so when people are playing these games within the family room, I think our goal is to try to get them to have it in a larger situation, a larger context of family interactions, rather than focusing just on these different games.
Great. Okay, so we're coming to the top of the hour, and I told you I was going to ask you this hard question. Presently, you're at around a level TRL 6 or so, and I know that when you developed this, you didn't use, correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't use any federal funds as part of this development effort. This was all done with in-house. When you look out at the audience here that you have here, tell us what some of your next steps are, and what investment or what areas can help you grow this platform or grow this offering out there, and what you might be looking for in an ecosystem partner to help push this to the next level.
Yeah, I think the biggest help might be for us to partner with a organization with a much better understanding of the military structure, the infrastructure, who is able to help us implement this technology. So it's the prototype is actually ready to roll out and scale up. But we just haven't had the opportunity to test it out in the field over an extended period of time. And so those are sort of the critical questions that we need to be able to answer, right? So how often are they being used? And when they use it, what are some of the problems in the field are they experiencing? And what do the data tell us? And across a board of, let's say, multiple users, how many users can we have at once? And so these are some of the really important questions that we need to answer. But as researchers at a university, don't have the resources to be able to go into military organizations at this point. And so if there is anyone who is able to help us implement this technology for further testing, I think that would be the most immediate next step for us.
Awesome. And so how would they get a hold of you?
I conveniently have my contact information on my slide. So I don't know if everybody sees it, but there's my email, there's our Twitter handle, and there is our website as well.
Awesome. And so with that, I want to thank you all for, this has been a great discussion. And, I think this is just a fascinating area that is going to just explode in terms of how we can use VR and XR tools in new and novel ways. And I think there's a real issue that you're trying to tackle with, dealing with long-term deployments, the stress of that, but then also the recovery and re-entering back into civilian life or back into, coming off of the job. And I think that's just really fascinating. I think you guys are just doing really great work. And so I want to thank you for participating and thank the audience for, being here with us today. And then also, want to be able to say congratulations once again, because you're one for one. I've known a number of individuals at ITSEC that have tried and submitted papers to ITSEC and have not had that opportunity to present. So I think you really struck a chord with this study, and I think it's really, really novel and really fascinating. So I want to thank you all and your team for doing such a great work, and invite all those people that are in our audience to connect with you afterwards, and let's really try and take this to the next level. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It was great to share our work.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Kevin.
So with that, we'll call it a session and go ahead and close out. And thanks again, everybody. And we'll see you next month. We do have a number of other papers lined up that will be coming up, and we will be posting that presentation as well as the all the notes and the FAQs that we have and some of the links as a follow-up that we'll have available to you. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.